Hello everyone, welcome to my first ever video. So in this video I'm gonna be reading Percy Jackson and the Olympians Book 1. So before I start reading the book, I wanted to tell you something, that I'm actually a very new YouTuber and I cannot make videos that are above 15 minutes. So I cannot record whole chapters because you guys may be able to see that this chapter is 19 minutes. So I can only do it at most 14 minutes, and that's my limits. So there are gonna be 2 to 3 parts for every chapters. So with that out of the way, let's begin this book. All I know about this book is that it's based on Greek mythology, and I know my Greek mythology stuff. I know the stories. So without any hesitation, let's get into it.
Percy Jackson and the Olympians. Book 1, The Lightning Thief, by Rick Royden. Chapter 1. I accidentally vaporize. My pre-algebra teacher.
That has to be the most interesting first chapter name. I like it.
Look, I didn't want to be a half-blood. If you're reading this because you think you might be one, my advice is, close this book right now, believe whatever lie your mom or your dad told you about your birth, and try to lead a normal life. Being a half-blood is dangerous. It's scary. Most of the time, it gets you killed in painful, nasty ways. If you're a normal kid, reading this because you think it's fiction, great, read on. I envy you for being able to believe that none of this ever happened. But if you recognize yourself in these pages, if you feel something stirring inside, stop reading immediately. You might be one of us. And once you know that, it's only a matter of time before they sense it too.
So the book starts off in a very interesting way. It's like, I dare you to read this. If you don't read this, you're gonna be a coward. It's as clear as that.
And they'll come for you. Don't say I didn't warn you.
Don't say I didn't warn you. I love
My
this
name is
starting.
Percy Jackson.
Okay.
I'm 12 years old. Until a few months ago, I was a boarding student at Yancey Academy, a private school for troubled kids in upstate New York. Am I a troubled kid? Yeah, you could say that. I could start at any point in my short, miserable life to prove it, but things really started going bad last May, when our 6th grade class took a field trip to Manhattan. 28 mental case kids and 2 teachers on a yellow school bus, heading to the Metropolitan Museum of Art to look at ancient Greek and Roman stuff. I know, it sounds like torture. Most Yancey field trips were. But Mr. Brunner, our Latin teacher, was leading this trip, so I had hopes. Mr. Brunner was this middle-aged guy in a motorized wheelchair. He had thinning hair and a scruffy beard and a frayed tweed jacket, which always smelled like coffee. You wouldn't think he'd be cool, but he told stories and jokes and let us play games in class. He also had this awesome collection of Roman armor and weapons, so he was the only teacher whose class didn't put me to sleep.
He's like,
I hope
he's like, it was the only teacher whose class didn't put me to sleep. I'm liking this. Like, there's a good start into it. Like the way as the book starts, in either like he's like, I dare you to read this. It's as simple as that. I know he's saying that don't read and stuff like that if you just feel yourself and stuff like that, whatever he's saying. But it's simply like as clear as I challenge you to read this. A good starting.
the trip would be okay. At least, I hoped that for once I wouldn't get in trouble. Boy, was I wrong. See, bad things happen to me on field trips. Like at my 5th grade school, when we went to the Saratoga battlefield. I had this accident with a Revolutionary War cannon. I wasn't aiming for the school bus.
Yeah, it's totally normal that a person in a 5 years old kid. I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry. My English is kind of really bad right now. So what I meant to say, a 11 years old kid messing with a cannon. That's totally normal. Yeah, everybody should allow that. That's totally normal. Don't restrict that. And then they're like, yeah, I wasn't aiming for the school. I like that part as well.
But of course I got expelled anyway. And before that, at my 4th grade school, we took a behind-the-scenes tour of the Marine World Shark Pool. I sort of hit the wrong lever on the catwalk and our class took an unplanned swim. And the time before that, well, you get the idea.
I do.
This trip, I was determined to be good. All the way into the city, I had to put up with Nancy Bobofit, the freckly red-headed kleptomaniac girl. hitting my best friend Grover in the back of the head with chunks of peanut butter and ketchup sandwich.
Peanut butter and ketchup.
Grover was an easy target. He was scrawny. He cried when he got frustrated. He must have been held back several grades, because he was the only 6th grader with acne and the start of a wispy beard on his chin. On top of all that, he was crippled. He had a note excusing him from PE for the rest of his life because he had some kind of muscular disease in his legs. He walked funny, like every step hurt him. But don't let that fool you. You should have seen him run when it was enchilada day in the cafeteria. Anyway, Nancy Boba Fett was throwing wads of sandwich that stuck in his curly brown hair, and she knew I couldn't do anything back to her because I was already on probation. The headmaster had threatened me with death by in-school suspension if anything bad, embarrassing, or even mildly entertaining happened on this trip.
Mildly entertaining.
I'm going to kill her, I mumbled. Grover tried to calm me down. It's okay, I like peanut butter. He dodged another piece of Nancy's lunch. That's it. I started to get up, but Grover pulled me back into my seat. You're already on probation, he reminded me. You know who'll get blamed if anything happens. Looking back on it, I wish I'd decked Nancy Boba Fett right then and there. In-school suspension would have been nothing compared to the mess I was about to get myself into. Mr. Brunner led the museum tour. He rode up front in his wheelchair, guiding us through the big echoey galleries, past marble statues in glass cases, full of really old black and orange pottery. It blew my mind that this stuff had survived for 2,000, 3,000 years. He gathered us around a 13-foot tall stone column with a big sphinx on the top, and started telling us how it was a grave marker, a stele, for a girl about our age. He told us about the carvings on the sides. I was trying to listen to what he had to say, because it was kind of interesting, but everybody around me was talking, and every time I told them to shut up, the other teacher chaperone, Mrs. Dodds, would give me the evil eye. Mrs. Dodds was this little math teacher from Georgia who always wore a black leather jacket, even though she was 50 years old.
A 50 years old maths teacher.
She looked mean enough to ride a Harley right into your locker. She'd come to Yancey halfway through the year, when our last math teacher had a nervous breakdown. From her first day, Mrs. Dodds loved Nancy Boba Fett and figured I was devil spawn. She would point her crooked finger at me and say, "Now, honey,"
I hate
real
that.
sweet. And I
That was horrifying.
knew I was going to get after-school detention for a month. One time, after she'd made me erase answers out of old math workbooks until midnight, I told Grover I didn't think Mrs. Dodds was human. He looked at me, real serious, and said, "You're absolutely right." Mr. Brunner kept talking about Greek funeral art. Finally, Nancy Boba Fett snickered something about the naked guy on the stele, and I turned around and said, "Will you shut up?" It came out louder than I meant it to. The whole group laughed. Mr. Brunner stopped his story. "Mr. Jackson," he said, "did you have a comment?" My face was totally red. I said, "No, sir." Mr. Brunner pointed to one of the pictures on the stele. "Perhaps you'd like to tell us what this picture represents?" I looked at the carving and felt a flush of relief because I actually recognized it. That's Kronos eating his kids, right? Yes, Mr. Brunner said, obviously not satisfied. "And he did this because?" Well, I racked my brain to remember. Kronos was the king god and... God?
The Titan,
Mr. Brunner
I think.
asked. Titan,
Yeah.
I corrected myself. And he didn't trust his kids, who were the gods. So, Kronos ate them, right? But his wife hid baby Zeus and gave Kronos a rock to eat instead.
Rock?
And later, when Zeus grew up, he tricked his dad Kronos into barfing up his brothers and sisters. Ew!
That is actually disgusting.
Said one of the girls behind me. And so there was this big fight between the gods and the Titans, I continued. And the gods won. Some snickers from the group. Behind me, Nancy Boba Fett mumbled to a friend. Like we're going to use this in real life. Like it's going to say on our job applications, please explain why Kronos ate his kids. "And why, Mr. Jackson?" Brunner said. "To paraphrase Miss Boba Fett's excellent question, does this matter in real life?" "Busted," Grover muttered. "Shut up," Nancy hissed, her face even brighter red than her hair. At least Nancy
I like the descriptions. Her face was even brighter red than her hair.
got packed too. Mr. Brunner was the only one who ever caught her saying anything wrong. He had radar ears.
I'm actually kind of liking this Mr. I don't know how to pronounce it properly, but I think it's Brunard, yeah. I'm kind of liking this Mr. Brunard guy.
I thought about his question and shrugged. I don't know, sir. I see. Mr. Brunner looked disappointed. Well, half credit, Mr. Jackson. Zeus did indeed feed Cronus a mixture of mustard and wine, which made him disgorge his other 5 children, who, of course, being immortal gods, had been living and growing up completely undigested in the Titan's stomach. The gods defeated their father, sliced him to pieces with his own scythe, and scattered his remains into Tartarus, the darkest part of the underworld. On that happy note, it's time for lunch. Mrs. Dodds, would you lead us back outside?
On that happy note, it's time for lunch.
The class drifted off, the girls holding their stomachs, the guys pushing each other around and acting like doofuses. Grover and I were about to follow when Mr. Brunner said, Mr. Jackson. I knew that was coming. I told Grover to keep going. Then I turned toward Mr. Brunner. Sir? Mr. Brunner had this look that wouldn't let you go. Intense brown eyes that could have been 1,000 years old and had seen everything. You must learn the answer to my question, Mr. Brunner told me. About the Titans? About real life, and how your studies apply to it. Oh. What you learn from me, he said, is vitally important.
Okay.
I expect you to treat it as such. I will accept only the best from you, Percy Jackson. I wanted to get angry. This guy pushed me so hard. I mean, sure, it was kinda cool on tournament days, when he dressed up in a suit of Roman armor and shouted, What ho! And challenged us, sword point against chalk, to run to the board and name every Greek and Roman person who had ever lived, and their mother, and what god they worshipped. But Mr. Brunner expected me to be as good as everybody else, despite the fact that I have dyslexia and attention deficit disorder.
Why, this guy has dyslexia and attention deficit disorder. That is like the worst combination ever. If you guys may not know this, but I know how it's like to be dyslexic. I'm not, but I am near to, as near as can be, not by not being be.
And I've never made above a C- in my life. No, he didn't expect me to be as good. He expected me to be better. And I just couldn't learn all those names and facts, much less spell them correctly. I mumbled something about trying harder, while Mr. Brunner took one long, sad look at the steel, like he'd been at this girl's funeral. He told me to go outside and eat my lunch. The class gathered on the front steps of the museum, where we could watch the foot traffic along Fifth Avenue. Overhead, a huge storm was brewing, with clouds blacker than I'd ever seen over the city. I figured maybe it was global warming or something, because the weather all across New
Wait a second. So, I know it's sharp, we're just 13 minutes. So, I think that's all we're gonna have time for today. The reason being that I can't record long videos because I'm not actually a fully registered YouTuber. So, that's all we're gonna have time for today, everyone. I will make sure to upload the next chapter as soon as, the part 2 of this chapter as soon as possible. And I will pretty sure do that maybe tomorrow at most. I will do it tomorrow. So that's all we're gonna have time for today. I'm gonna see you in the next chapter. Peace.